Imagine standing in a room filled with 200 people, wearing your best dress, only to realize you were invited just to be the punchline of a cruel joke. My name is Harper Vance. I'm 29 years old, a pediatric surgical resident, and a single mother to my incredible 4-year-old son, Leo. For years, I thought my family's coldness was just a lack of understanding. I thought if I worked harder, saved more lives, and stayed quiet, they would eventually see my worth. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting at table 12 at my younger sister Chloe's lavish wedding. The champagne was flowing, and the roses cost more than my car. Chloe stood up, shimmering in her designer gown, and grabbed the crystal-encrusted microphone. I expected a thank you or a tribute to her new husband. Instead, she looked directly at me. With a smirk that dripped with malice, she told the entire room, "I'm so glad my big sister Harper could make it. It's important for everyone to see that even if you're a leftover woman that no man wants, you can still find a cheap dress and show up to a real celebration." The silence that followed lasted only a second before the laughter started. It wasn't a polite chuckle, it was a roar. I looked at my mother. She wasn't shocked. She was nodding, whispering to the woman next to her, "She's always been the family's damaged goods." My father didn't defend me. He simply raised his glass, covering a wide, mocking grin with his hand. I felt Leo's tiny hand tremble in mine. He looked up at me, his big eyes filling with tears because he could feel the weight of their cruelty, even if he didn't understand the words. He whispered, "Mommy, why are they being mean?" My heart didn't just break. It hardened into something cold and sharp. They thought I was the weak one because I chose a life of service and motherhood over their shallow games. They forgot that as a surgeon, I know exactly where to cut to make it hurt the most. Hold on. Before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. The laughter continued to ring in my ears, but suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A man in a tailored charcoal suit walked in. He wasn't on the guest list. He wasn't a friend of the groom. My father's face went from pale to ghostly white the moment he saw him. The stranger didn't head for the bar or an empty seat. He walked straight to the head table, took the microphone out of Chloe's shaking hand, and looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity. It was recognition. What he said next didn't just stop the laughter. It made the air leave the room. He didn't just know who I was. He knew a secret my parents had spent 30 years trying to bury. A secret that was about to turn this $1 million wedding into a legal crime scene. The man in the charcoal suit didn't raise his voice, but the entire ballroom felt like it had been plunged into ice water. My father, who had been chuckling into his wine just seconds ago, was now gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were turning blue. The stranger's name was Julian Thorne. In our city, that name meant power, litigation, and the kind of wealth my family only pretended to have. "I apologize for the intrusion," Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto my sister Chloe, who was still frozen in her white silk gown. But I couldn't help but overhear the toast. "It's fascinating to hear you call Dr. Harper Vance unwanted and leftover, especially since the very ground you're standing on, this entire estate, technically belongs to her." The room went from deathly silent to a chaotic whisper in an instant. Chloe's face shifted from a smug grin to a mask of pure confusion. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice cracking. "This is our family's legacy. My father paid for this wedding. My father owns this land." Julian didn't blink. He pulled a single notarized document from his inner jacket pocket and laid it on the head table, right next to the 3-tier wedding cake. "Actually, Chloe, your father has been a trustee, not an owner. This estate was part of a generational trust established by Harper's maternal grandfather, a man your father conveniently forgot to mention in his self-made success stories. The trust was set to dissolve and transfer full ownership to the eldest grandchild upon their 29th birthday. That was 2 weeks ago. I sat there, stunned. I looked at my mother, whose face was now a blotchy mess of red and white. She had always told me my grandfather died penniless. She had spent my entire life making me feel like a burden, a charity case who was lucky to have a roof over her head. Every time I asked for help with Leo's childcare or my medical school tuition, they told me the well was dry. Meanwhile, they were living in a mansion that was legally mine, using my inheritance to fund Chloe's European vacations and this $200,000 wedding. The betrayal wasn't just a sting, it was a physical blow to my chest. They didn't just dislike me, they were robbing me. My father finally found his voice, though it was thin and desperate. Julian, this isn't the time or place. We're in the middle of a celebration. We can discuss clerical errors in private. This isn't a clerical error, Arthur, Julian replied, his voice hardening. It's fraud, and Harper didn't come here to discuss it. I did. Because as her legal counsel, I've been instructed to inform you that the locks on the main house are being changed as we speak. Chloe let out a horrified shriek, her hand flying to her mouth. You can't do this. It's my wedding night. Where are we supposed to go? I stood up then, my hand still holding Leo's. The room's attention shifted to me, the unwanted sister. I looked at my parents, who had laughed while I was insulted, who had hidden my own life's security from me while I struggled through 80-hour weeks at the hospital. I looked at Chloe and said, You wanted everyone to see who I really am, right? Well, now they see. I'm the owner of this house. And since I'm so unwanted, I think it's best if you all find somewhere else to stay. You have exactly 1 hour before the security team arrives to escort all unauthorized guests off the premises. But as I turned to walk out, my mother screamed something that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't an apology. It was a threat. One that involved Leo and a secret I thought was buried in a hospital file 4 years ago. My mother's voice didn't just crack the silence. It shattered the remains of my heart. She stood up, her expensive pearls shaking against her throat, and pointed a trembling finger not at me, but at Leo. You think you've won, Harper? She hissed, loud enough for the first 5 rows of guests to hear. You think you can just kick us out? If you go through with this, I will tell everyone, and the courts, exactly where that boy came from. I'll make sure the medical board hears about the discrepancies in your residency application regarding his father. The room went from shocked to breathless. I felt the blood drain from my face. My career, the one thing I had bled for, the 36-hour shifts, the lives I'd saved. It was all built on a foundation of privacy I'd fought to protect. Leo's father wasn't just a missing person. He was the son of the hospital's biggest donor, a man who had vanished after a scandal that almost ruined the institution. If my mother opened that Pandora's box, my license wouldn't just be under review. I'd be blacklisted from every surgical theater in the country. My father saw my hesitation, and his smirk returned. It was the same look he had when Chloe called me unwanted. He adjusted his tie, regained his composure, and stepped toward Julian Thorne. You see, Julian? Family matters are complicated. Harper, sit down. Eat your expensive dinner. We'll forget this little outburst, and you'll keep your job. It's a fair trade, don't you think? For a split second, I felt that old familiar weight. The feeling of being the small, quiet girl who just wanted to be loved. I looked at Leo, who was watching me with so much trust in his eyes. He didn't see a leftover woman. He saw a hero. And that's when I realized they weren't threatening me because they were strong. They were threatening me because they were terrified. I looked at Julian. He didn't look worried. In fact, he looked almost bored. He leaned in and whispered just loud enough for my parents to hear. Blackmail is a heavy charge, Arthur, especially when the person you're threatening has already filed a preemptive disclosure with the board. My mother's jaw dropped. I hadn't just been working at the hospital. I'd been preparing. I knew my parents would play dirty the moment I claimed my inheritance. 2 months ago, I had sat down with the chief of surgery and told him the entire truth. I didn't wait for them to expose me. I exposed myself first. I took a step toward the head table, my heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown. "The board already knows, Mom," I said, my voice steady and cold. "They know about Leo. They know about his father. And they've already cleared my ethics review because, unlike you, I don't hide behind lies to feel powerful." I reached out and grabbed the edge of the white tablecloth, the one holding the $5,000 cake and the vintage champagne. "This wedding is over," I said. "Not because I'm bitter, but because this party was paid for with money stolen from a trust meant to provide for my son's future." With one swift motion, I didn't just walk away. I signaled the waitstaff, staff that I now realized were being paid by my trust. "Stop the service," I commanded. "The bar is closed. The music stays off. And Chloe?" I looked at my sister, who was sobbing into her veil. "You can keep the dress. But the diamond necklace you're wearing? The one that belonged to our grandmother. Take it off. Now." The guests were already starting to scramble for their coats, the scandal of the century unfolding before their eyes. But as my father tried to grab the documents from the table, a new group of people entered through the side doors. They weren't security guards. They were wearing dark windbreakers with letters on the back that made my father's knees finally buckle. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the $4 million that had disappeared from my grandfather's business accounts over the last decade. And the person who had called the authorities wasn't me. It was someone I never expected to see again. The letters on the back of the windbreakers were bold, white, and unmistakable. IRS CI. Criminal investigation. The room, already a whirlwind of whispers, fell into a vacuum of terrified silence. My father's hand, which had been reaching for the trust documents, froze in midair. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. Stepping out from behind the federal agents was a man I hadn't seen in 5 years. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes held the same sharp intensity I remembered from my medical school days. It was Silas Sterling, the man my parents claimed had abandoned me when I got pregnant. The man they told me was a deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with Leo. "Silas?" I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. Leo's grip on my hand tightened as he sensed the shift in my energy. Silas didn't look at my parents first. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the cold professional mask he wore cracked, showing a flash of deep, aching regret. Then, he turned his gaze toward my father. "Hello, Arthur. It's been a long time since you paid those men to run me off the road and threaten my life if I ever spoke to Harper again." The guests gasped. My mother's glass of champagne hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. "That's a lie!" she shrieked, but her voice was pitchy and thin. "We gave you money to leave. You took the check." "I took the check," Silas said calmly, stepping into the light of the crystal chandeliers. "And I handed it directly to a private investigator. Then I spent the next 5 years building a case. You didn't just steal Harper's inheritance, Arthur. You used her grandfather's shell companies to launder money from the hospital's construction fund. You thought that by making Harper the unwanted outcast, no one would ever look into the accounts she was supposed to oversee." Chloe let out a wail, sinking to her knees in her $20,000 gown. "My wedding? You're ruining my wedding over some stupid money?" I looked at my sister, the girl I had shared a room with, the girl I had protected from bullies, the girl who had just called me trash in front of the world. "It's not some money, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "It's my life. It's Leo's future. It's the truth." The lead agent stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Arthur Vance, Elena Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." As the zip ties clicked shut around my father's wrists, he looked at me, not with apology, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You've destroyed this family, Harper," he spat. "You're a curse. No wonder your mother and I never loved you." The words should have stung. They should have leveled me. But as I stood there, flanked by the man who had been forced away from me and the son who was my entire world, I felt nothing. The power they held over me was a shadow, and the sun was finally rising. But as the agents began to lead them out, Silas leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Harper, we need to go. Now. There's one more thing your father did, something he hasn't been arrested for yet. And if we don't get Leo out of this building in the next 60 seconds, we might lose him forever." The urgency in Silas's voice hit me like a physical blow. Without a second thought, I scooped Leo into my arms. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a stark contrast to the cold triumph I'd felt moments ago. Silas didn't wait. He grabbed my elbow and guided us toward the service exit, bypassing the sea of stunned guests and flashing cameras. "What is it, Silas?" I hissed, as we burst into the cool night air of the estate's gardens. "What do you mean, lose him?" "Your father knew this day might come, Harper," Silas said, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the parking lot. "He didn't just steal the money. He took out a massive life contingency insurance policy on Leo, naming himself as the sole beneficiary. But there was a clause. The policy only pays out if Leo is removed from the country or becomes unreachable due to a legal custody shift. Arthur wasn't just planning to bankrupt you. He was planning to kidnap Leo and disappear to a non-extradition country the second the wedding ended. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins. My own father. He hadn't just mocked me. He had viewed my son as a backup paycheck, a human escape boat. Suddenly, a black SUV roared to life at the edge of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the dark like predatory eyes. It wasn't the police. It was a private security team Arthur had hired months ago. They weren't there to protect the wedding. They were there to collect the asset. "Get in!" Silas shouted, shoving me toward a silver sedan. We scrambled inside just as the SUV peeled out, tires screaming against the gravel. But they weren't coming for us. They were heading for the main gates, trying to block the exit. "They think they can trap us," I said, my surgical focus suddenly kicking in. I looked at Silas. "But this is my estate now, every inch of it." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and swiped a command on the smart home app I'd gained access to only an hour prior. At the touch of a button, the heavy iron perimeter gates, the ones my father had installed to keep the world out, slammed shut and locked with a hydraulic hiss. The SUV slammed on its brakes, skidding sideways just inches from the bars. They were trapped inside the very cage my father had built. Within minutes, the IRS agents and local police swarmed the vehicle. The kidnapping plot was foiled before it could even begin. The silence that followed was the first real peace I had known in a decade. I looked down at Leo, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder, exhausted by the chaos. Silas turned to me, his expression soft. "I'm sorry it took so long, Harper. I never stopped fighting to get back to you." "We have a lot to talk about," I said, a small smile finally touching my lips. "But for now, I just want to go home. To my home." My parents and Chloe were led away in the back of police cruisers, their reputations ruined, their wealth evaporated, and their cruelty finally exposed to the world. They called me unwanted. But as I looked at the life I had built, and the truth I had reclaimed, I realized I was exactly where I was meant to be. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and hidden truths. If you love seeing bullies get exactly what they deserve, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab for more stories where the underdog finally comes out on top.